Hey, happy Sunday. Today we're talking about gentleness, which is one of the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. So we're going to take a look at Acts 18 today. And as we get to know the characters in Acts 18, we're going to get to know a little bit more about God and how God sees gentleness. Now, so often when we think about gentleness, we think about it as like a weak characteristic, something that isn't super strong. But the reality is that gentleness means that the person possesses passion, right? Power and authority. And I want you to think about God sitting up on his throne, right? All of the authority and creation that God possesses, and yet he applies gentleness to us, right? Where he can provide wrath and anger, he chooses to instead provide mercy and grace to us. And part of that comes from the aspects of the gentleness that is the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. So let's take a look at some of those. So some of those that we're going to take a look at today in Acts 18, we're going to take a look at humility, we're going to take a look at submission, we're going to look at teaching, and we're going to look at a teaching spirit. So let's pick up, we're just going to read some parts of Acts 18. We're going to start off with Paul at the beginning of verse 1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them, and because he was of the same craft, he abode with them, and wrought for them by their occupation. They were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit, and testified to the Jews that Jesus was with Christ. So here we see Paul coming to Priscilla and Aquila, who do the same craft as him, showing humility and submission, which was two of the parts of gentleness, as he stays with them, as he learns from them, as they learn from him, and he continues his work of presenting to Jesus Christ, showing that it becomes so required of us as we operate in Christ's message that we show submission and also humility when we interact with others. When we come up against those as we're doing our work, we need to make sure that we are applying the teachings of Jesus Christ in gentleness, of submission and humility. Now, as Paul continues to go on with Priscilla and Aquila, we're going to see some other examples of submission and humility. So I'm going to jump ahead, and we're going to come up to when Paul sails for Syria. And Paul after this tarried there a good while, and then took his leave of his brethren, and sailed thence into Syria. And with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Sentia, for he had a vow. And he came to Ephesus, and left them there, but he himself entered into the synagogue, and reasoned with the Jews. So Paul, who has such commitments to vows, probably from his life previous, shows humility when he shaves his head, and he commits to vows. He then also leaves Priscilla and Aquila at Ephesus, leading us into the next aspect of gentleness in the fruit of Spirit, which is teaching. As they have learned from Paul, they now need to teach others and to find others with a teachable spirit. And we're going to see that as we head into the end of Acts 18. We're in Acts 18:24 when we meet Apollos. And a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the Scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man was instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them, and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. So here we see that we've got Priscilla and Aquila, who have shown submission, who have shown humility, and are now teaching, have found Apollos. And Apollos in his own right is an eloquent speaker, really good at the Scriptures, but he knows the baptism of John. So in him they find this teachable spirit that allows them to expand on the gentleness of the fruit of the Spirit by teaching Apollos, and by Apollos also receiving that teaching, thereby expounding on the submission, on the humility, on the teaching, and on the teachable spirit that we're looking at in the gentleness, which is the aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. And how does that all turn out? What happens with this whole crew? Well, and when he was disposed to pass into Achaia, the brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him, who, when he was come, helped them much which had believed through grace. For he mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, showing by the scriptures that Jesus was Christ, which is ultimately our goal with any of the fruits of the Spirit, is to show that Jesus is the Christ. So here we learn that aspect of gentleness through submission, through humility, through teaching, and through a teachable spirit with Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila, with Apollos, and ultimately with Jesus Christ. All right, happy Sunday, chatting at Cheesman. Happy Sunday, y'all.